A slide reads Building Positive and Supportive Peer Relationships with Julie Meyer and Kayla Coborn. Also displayed on the slide are the logos for the Wisconsin Deafblind Technical Assistance Project and California Deafblind Services.
All right, I think we'll get started. My name is Jen Gettleman. I am the deafblind consultant for the Wisconsin Deafblind Technical Assistance Project, or WDB-TAP. First, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us this afternoon to learn more about supporting peer relationships for students who are deafblind or who have a disability. Before we begin today, I would like to review the available accessibility options. We have ASL interpretation available, which you should see on your screen now. We also have closed captioning available. To view the captions, at the bottom of your screen is a CC button. You'll just want to click on that button and turn on whichever option works best for you. If at any point you are having trouble with any of the accessibility features, please feel free to send me a private chat message and I will do my best to help troubleshoot the issue. This presentation is being recorded and we will be posting it to the WDB-TAP YouTube page in the next few weeks. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A and they will be answered either at various times throughout the presentation or at the end of the presentation. Now I would like to welcome and quickly introduce Julie Meyer and Kayla Coborn. Julie Meyer is an educational specialist for the California Deafblind Services, providing technical assistance and training to families of children with deaf blindness and their early intervention and educational teams. Julie has worked in the field of special education since 1987. Her roles have included paraeducator, special education teacher, and faculty member in the special education department at San Francisco State University. While she was at San Francisco State, she taught courses in deafblindness, autism spectrum disorders, inclusive education, and assessment and curricular design for learners with extensive support needs. Julie grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and has deep family roots throughout Wisconsin, reaching back 5 generations. Some of her happiest childhood memories include spending summers with her cousins at lake cabins near Wild Rose and Rhinelander, and visiting her grandparents in Cross Plains, as well as attending Friday night fish fries. Kayla Coborn is the newest education specialist for California Deafblind Services. Prior to stepping into this role, she had met this group of professionals at San Francisco State University during her graduate program, where she earned her master's in special education. She worked as a one-on-one aide for a child who is deafblind prior to becoming a teacher in an extensive support needs classroom. Her passion in education is inclusive practices, and she's excited to continue to work with others to make our schools more inclusive for people of all abilities. We are thrilled to have the opportunity to learn from both of you today, and I'm going to turn it over to the two of you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Optimizing for everything. Okay, good. And then I'm going to make sure that I'm hiding this. Okay. So here we go. Present. Okay. So hi, I'm Julie, and I'm just realizing, Jen, I'm going to ask for some help. Now that I realize I hid the hiding panels.
Sure.
Now I can't see the other people, so I actually do want to see the other people. So, do you know what I do for that to get them back?
If you
Press escape, maybe. I'm so sorry, everyone.
God.
Oh wait, I think that was it. Okay, so I'm actually gonna. I'm not gonna hide this. Okay, So I don't know why I'm not seeing people now, but anyways,
What if you click show video panel right above?
yes, thank you, Kayla. There we go. Okay, here we go.
Oh, we
All right,
see
tech
you.
issues. Okay, so yes, I'm Julie, and I'm not the tech specialist on the California Deafblind Services team, but I'm very happy to be here today with my colleague Kayla. We were thrilled to be invited to present on this topic, which we're very passionate about, talking about peer relationships and friendships. So off we go, and Kayla is going to start us off with sharing a really special friendship story of ours.
Yes, I was actually I was going to just message Jen because I can now see two video panels. Can you see that too?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yeah, so Julie, I can see yours and it's like mirroring it. So I don't know
Okay,
if that'd be hard
so
to
then what we
see.
need to do is I need to go back up there, I guess, and not show video panel. And Kayla will just have to talk with each other, I guess, when we want to say
Like
something.
we're on the phone. So
Okay.
old school.
Yes. All right, we're off. Let's get going.
Okay. So, as said, I'm Kayla, and this is a picture of me and Julie at our last in-person conference in March 2020 at CEC, right before, like a couple of weeks before lockdown. But I love Julie, and let me tell you why. Let me tell you our story together. So, I met Julie. I was her student at San Francisco State University. And we had she was my professor, I was her student. And then she ended up being my advisor in my classroom, where she helped me within my student year teaching. And we just kept getting closer. We had very similar opinions on education. And then we started to present together. Julie invited me to present at Caltash with her. And that was so much fun. And then it was, a whole weekend, like in hotel rooms, where we really got to start, getting to know each other a little bit more on a personal level. And then when I moved to Southern California, I was really hoping that that California Deafblind Services Southern California position was going to open, because I was obsessed with people who are deafblind and CDBS. And then when a position opened, then I got to be a coworker with Julie, which totally switched our relationship around. But just our friendship just continued to grow more and more. And now we've known each other 5 or 6 years, 7 years. I don't know how long it's been.
Or, yeah, 7 or
Yeah,
8.
probably
Yeah.
more.
Mhm.
But she became a person. I mean, I called when I was having problems still as a teacher. She became a very trusted relationship for me. Which started out on campus to in the field to just as a friend, just as a friend, but just as a very good friend. And so it's just so great how we've just evolved into so many our roles have changed so much. But now we're here to where we are. And she is such a trusted relationship. She's such a person in my life that's so important. And we just felt like our relationship is such a great starting point to talk about peer relationships with our students and our kids, and why it is so important to have these relationships in our lives.
Yeah, and if I can just add, just hopefully that you'll feel at the end of this presentation a little bit more that this should be something that happens for everyone. We should want this for all individuals, because relationships with peers are important throughout our life. Okay, Kayla?
Okay, so on this picture, on this slide, there's a picture of me when I was in elementary school. I'm pretty sure this is a Girl Scout activity, like we camped in the backyard or something. But it's a former picture of me in school. And we just want you to kind of think back to your school years. Could you remember your best friend's name? If you still talk to them, who did you sit with at lunch? Can you picture your favorite game on the recess yard, or any favorite high school memories with your friends? And if you would be willing to share your school memories in the chat box, just to show that, how important it is to have friends growing up and in school. I mean, when you're going to school, you are in school all day. I feel like it's more than a full-time job. And it's just so important that, you like being in your community, you have friends in your community, you have relationships with the people you're seeing all day, every day. So if anybody has some quick memories that they want to throw in the chat, but if not, I mean, Girl Scouts was definitely one for me. I did it all the way up until high school and met a lot of good friends that way. And I feel like Girl Scouts is definitely an area that can be inclusive. Hopefully no one has experienced otherwise. But playing on the yard, there's always different areas in play yards where, if something's too overly stimulated, you can go somewhere else. So people have said in the chat, Debbie and I meeting at the corner for fun or a walk to school to talk about our troubles. Love that. Huge. I mean, I feel like one of the biggest parts of a trusted relationship is that you have someone to talk to when life gets hard, as it does. Double Dutch jump roping. I've actually never done double Dutch because I've never had two people who can do two ropes at the same time. I can remember playing with Mary Julie, sitting on her front stoop, playing with Avon mini samples. Did I say that right? Bus rides. Oh, on the way to sporting events. Yeah, definitely love those. A group of 5 of us with a leader, but had lots of memories and drama to always remember. Tetherball, grade school friends. I love all these. Okay. Thank you so much. Avon mini lipsticks are the best. I got to Google this. But I love all these memories. This is so great that, we all know how great these memories are and that it's been years later and we still cherish these moments. And so we're going to talk about today how we can get all of our students into great peer relationships, like a lot of us seem to have.
All right. Well, thanks, Kayla. And certainly those responses really show like how important having friendships are throughout our life. The fact that you can all look back and remember the names of your elementary school friends or important people in high school, or have these, memories and really, really happy memories of things that happened back then, and perhaps are still connected to a lot of those people. And I think just the fact that you've signed up to attend this webinar demonstrates that you probably already understand how important social skills and these positive relationships really are to the quality of life for someone. So, but what's interesting, I think, and so does Kayla and other people that have really studied peer relationships, especially related to individuals with disabilities and the opportunities that they have for these same relationships, is it's not an area that we measure in terms of assessments of is a child having good outcomes in school. So we pay a lot of attention to these yearly academic assessments, but personally, I think we should also be paying attention to what's happening with the student in terms of their peer relationships. Is their circle of friends getting broader? And it's just such an important way to practice and learn the positive social skills that we need throughout life too, and just in everyday routines and activities that happen at home, and how you might interact with other people in your family and your siblings or cousins and neighbors, but also at school and community settings. So there's a lot actually that can be learned through friendship. So I'm so happy that you're all here. And another key thing, and some of you pointed that out with some of your examples, is this happens naturally for most children and youth. Admittedly, it's harder for some, but for most children and youth, this just is something that occurs, and it occurs because they're able to pick it up through incidental learning. They're watching what's happening. And as this natural experience occurs for children, and as you heard from Kayla's example of our relationship and how it evolved, what these relationships do is that they provide really important support and nurturance, which again, we all need. We're not solo beings out here in the world trying to make it through. We rely on support. We rely on help. We rely on other people noticing us and caring about us and giving us advice. Peer relationships and friendships also really help children and youth develop a sense of their self-identity because they have this sense that they belong somewhere. They belong to this school. And, so they're like, my children went to high school nearby, and so they were the Spartans. And when they were in elementary school, their mascot was the Rattlers because we have rattlesnakes nearby. But then Kayla mentioned Girl Scouts or some kind of, youth organization, or if you're on a particular sporting team, or if you're the theater kid, or you're on the debate team. But you have a sense of belonging that it's very strongly tied to the identity that you're developing for yourself, which becomes more and more important as kids get older. And then finally, these relationships allow individuals the opportunity to develop those interpersonal skills. So how to get along with other people, how to collaborate and cooperate, how to resolve conflicts, how to problem solve. So again, all the types of things that people are going to be looking for later in someone that they would want to employ. So we have to know that these are important developmental milestones for all children, but they can be really difficult to form and maintain for children and youth who are deafblind, and especially those who may be emerging communicators. So they may not use spoken or sign language with enough fluency for other people to really clearly understand their messages. And I think a lot of that occurs because the rest of us, because it's this natural experience, but we learn about it incidentally from the time we're very young. We're watching and we're listening to what's occurring as we watch people interact with each other, have positive interactions, develop these relationships. So if you have barriers related to incidental learning, it may be harder. On the next slide, I want to talk about what some of these factors are that affect that development. And these might be also seen as like barriers that are the things that make it difficult for these relationships to more naturally develop. First is just limited opportunities. If kids are in segregated programs or segregated classes and aren't around typically developing peers, they won't have the opportunities to even form the relationship. So that's something to consider. Certainly the impact of having a vision loss, to have difficulty with hearing, if your communication skills or social skills haven't developed to the same level as your peers, that is going to have an impact on the interactions. Students might need more support. They might need more time for skill development. They might need more practice. Again, I think it's best done in natural context with peers helping them. Students that use different modes of communication. So there may be a child who's deafblind that uses multiple modes of communication. They may use some sign language because their speech may not be very developed, or it may not be very easy to understand because of articulation. They may use picture symbols or photographs or objects. And if that's different from what the peers are using, if the peers either are using spoken language or ASL, then it might be harder for them to make that connection without really thinking about intentionally how you're going to support them learning about each other's differences. Peers also just don't know enough about sensory differences. I mean, many adults don't either, but the fact that peers don't understand that not being able to having some limitations with your vision as well as your hearing is going to mean that you're going to miss information in the environment, that you're going to miss social cues that other people are picking up through gestures or facial expressions, or they're not going to hear something, or they're not going to understand some of the language that's used because they haven't developed the concepts to understand what that means. So these learners need additional supports then to be successful, and their peers may not understand what those support needs. They might just see, well, that's just a kid that needs help, or that person's always with them, without understanding that there's ways that you can, that person's providing supports that this child needs so that they can participate. And then finally, and this is a big one, and that I've written some articles about, and I've talked about a lot in different presentations, is just the adults that are there supporting the child, which is really important when they're in school. They may not be using the strategies that are actually helping to connect kids, so that so that the interactions are reciprocal, so balanced. Both children are getting something out of it, and it looks more like typical relationships with that balance there. It's not just the helpy thing. And also insufficient strategies in terms of making sure kids are engaging in shared activities together. So these are factors that affect it. Now, I don't think because these exist for some kids who are deafblind or have multisensory impairments or some types of disabilities, these are certainly, could be seen as barriers, but I don't think that should mean that because these exist, relationships can't form, because I've seen the opposite many times. If you are intentional in terms of identifying what the barriers are, but then looking for opportunities to reduce those barriers or just completely diminish them, then you will see these really beautiful relationships form. And I've met children who have, with really intentional planning, and those are the types of things we'll talk about today, have had relationships with peers that have gone all the way through their school years, all the way through high school. So it definitely can happen. It's a team effort, though, and you want to be including families and all the team members on the team. We wanted to also point out a little bit this distinction. With inclusion and integration, I think many times people just think that means a child with a disability is just put into a setting where there's children without disabilities, and because they're there, we've got them integrated, and now they're fully part of everything in the classroom. And that's not really what we've seen is true and what research would uphold. That you really have to, again, look at the environment, look at the child's support needs, the child or the youth, if you're talking about older children, look at the opportunities and really kind of figure out how you can help the child have a presence rather than just be present there. So a presence is really essential to having that sense of belonging and being seen as an equal member and developing those social connections. And the difference between a person with a presence and a person that's just present is that the other people in the environment, they know that person. They don't just know their name, but they know, what their favorite sports team is. They know, if they know what kind of jokes make them laugh. They know particular skills that student may have. And they also understand why they might use particular assistive technology or require other support needs. And then the other thing about having a presence is everybody in the environment, the adults and the peers, recognize that everybody has something to contribute. So for some students who have multiple disabilities, that might be, I knew a girl who her contribution was going around and using her a switch talker to just ask each person in the class if they were getting school lunch that day. And she went up to each kid in the class and said, "School lunch? Are you getting school lunch?" And then if they were, they reached in their pocket or backpack and got out the money that went into the envelope. This was before you had the cards where you just showed that to the lunch lady and put it in the envelope. So it might seem like it took her a long time. It was a half-an-hour job she did every morning, but she was contributing something to her class community. So we can find ways for that to happen for everybody. And then this is just an image that Kayla likes to share, and it's a good one if you're a visual person, to kind of really show you the difference between presence and present. You can clearly see the top two with exclusion, where they're just outside of the group, the red dots, and then separation, there's just two separate groups and the red dots don't even get to be on the outside kind of looking in. And then in integration, they're in the room, but they're not connected to the other students. They're not as involved. And then with inclusion, you see that everybody's kind of there, and we're going to assume that everybody's there and it's an equitable situation because everybody is having their particular support needs met. So I wanted to talk about, and we're right on time, I'm happy to see. I wanted to talk now about these 3 practices because this is what we are going to kind of focus on in particular today. And if you want to know more about this, when I was a special ed teacher out here in Berkeley, California, I was an inclusion support teacher. So I supported students who didn't belong in a separate class that I taught. They were all in different classes. It was a kindergarten through 5th grade school. They were in a variety of different classes throughout the school, and what at that point I was really passionate already about peer relationships and really promoting their connection with their peers in the classroom, because peers actually were really necessary because they were a great natural support, because it wasn't always that there could be a paraeducator present or an intervener present at all times of the day. So I really, and these were the types of things I thought about. And then in 2019, I wrote an article for California Deafblind Services, our newsletter, and you can find that on our website. And there's also a link to it in the resource list that Jen should have, or the Wisconsin project shared with you, I hope. But in that, I talked about how you could promote peer relationships between students, whether these students are integrated and included together in the same classes, or whether they spend some time together during the school day. If students are served in a special ed class, but they have opportunities to be with students. So I think, and if you think about these 3 practices, increasing opportunities, providing information, and using effective facilitation strategies, you can really start to develop really positive relationships, the use of more peer supports, and also really help promote natural opportunities for self-advocacy by the student themselves as they start to understand who are the peers that they can rely on, who are those trusted relationships out there. So this is what we're going to dig into a little bit deeper now, these 3 areas. And so in terms of expanding opportunities, the most obvious one is that kids just need to have opportunities to be together more. And so on this slide, there's 5 particular suggestions I have, and it would be interesting to hear if other people have other suggestions. But a key one is just, if you can, to increase times that they're spending in classes with other peers. I mean, kids are at school 6 hours a day. So if there's opportunities that they could, even if they aren't assigned as a member of a general education class, if they could spend, go to library time with the class, or art, if they could join them for buddy reading time, if maybe the class does really cool science experiments or goes on field trips. So are there ways that you can kind of get connected with those classes? So because that's where you're going to have the maximum amount of opportunities for kids to be connected. The more kids spend time together and this is true in elementary as well as secondary school, kids tend to form relationships with the people they spend the most time with. Now, outside of that, you should also think about what are common spaces within the school where other peers are. And again, we're going to think about same age peers. So when are the 1st and 2nd graders or kindergartners out on the recess yard? What time do the 3rd and 4th graders go to lunch? Where do they do that? Does that happen in the cafeteria? Does that happen out, at picnic tables on the yard? What happens during passing period for older grades when students go to different classes? So thinking about, are your students in those spaces? And then when you're in those spaces, what kind of activities are happening, and are your students engaging in the same thing? So again, we want to think back to what we said about presence versus present. So it's great to be in the cafeteria at the same time or on the recess yard or using the library, but are the students also then engaged with peers doing the same things as them? Because again, these are the ways we're going to build those relationships, be able to fade a little bit of the adult support and have the adult support now providing more of the facilitation to both students, both the peer and the student who's deafblind. And then when you think about these common activities, you want to also think about shared activities and shared interests. So when kids develop friendships, now when they're really young in elementary school, they typically, like, their friends are always the kids that are in their class. I remember this clearly with my own children. That's who their friends were, the kids that were in, that belonged to room 102. And then the next year, when they're in third grade and they're in room 105, they might have completely different friends because they start to identify it's with those kids they're spending time with. But there's also a group of kids that they form closer relationships with. And as kids also get older, this becomes more true. They spend time with people that are interested in the same things as them or like the same activities. So the same kids that, might be a sporty kid or a kid that, maybe enjoys, in Wisconsin, enjoys skiing or ice fishing or going, fishing in the summer or all kinds of things that I'm trying to think back to things that I know that people in Wisconsin enjoy. Talking about the Green Bay Packers, right? So having these shared activities and interests that the kids do, but also it might be kids, that love Dungeons and Dragons, or playing those kind of imaginary games and things like that. So we'll want to think about, when you think about your student, don't only see the disability or see them as a deaf-blind child, but what are the things that they're really interested in? Because that might be the way that you're going to connect them with other peers. And then finally, another option is to, if there aren't a lot of these integrated opportunities there that you can see, or you want kids to get more connected through shared activities, think about joining or starting a club. Because that can be another way to get those, especially at the upper grades, that can be a great way to get students connected. So again, these are all things that we talk about in greater depth in that article. I just was going to share this quickly. We're not going to really go through it, but I love Eric Carter, who's done a ton of research in the area of extensive support needs and peer relationships. He's at the Vanderbilt University, but I actually believe he did his PhD work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, but I could be wrong, but I think that's where he's from. But he's got this great table that I share with lots of teachers that I train, and he just asks people, and he does this when he does trainings for whole schools and school districts, is just think about these different settings within the school and just ask yourself, are the students in your class or the students that you're supporting or on your caseload, are they in all of these settings at the same time as their peers without disabilities? Are they using these facilities at the same time? And if they are, when they're there, are they kind of in the same place? So in the cafeteria, are they sitting amongst their peers or are they sitting in a separate place? If they're in an elective class, are they at a whole separate table or are they in amongst their peers? And then what are the activities that are occurring? And are your students engaged in that? So this is just a quick and easy kind of reflective activity for you to kind of think about. And one of the resources in the resource list is a great series of videos that he did for a training actually up in Alberta, Canada, but it's the best free source I can find on the internet for learning about how he thinks about developing peer mentoring and peer supports for students with disabilities. So I encourage you to check that out if you're interested in learning more. But what this made Kayla and I think about as we were thinking about that chart I just showed you and thinking about, and the circle that I showed you before that about all these opportunities, expanded opportunities to get connected to students, is these spaces you're going to have to give particular consideration to children or youth who are deafblind, because the environment has a really strong influence on interaction. So what's happening in the space is that is the space something that the child can orient to and participate in and manage in terms of the visual load of the space, like how much is going on visually. Same thing with auditory. You might have students that just, can't handle that much different sounds or loud sounds and things like that. So that can have a really big impact on it. The activities that are occurring have a big impact. Again, is the student able to engage in it? If not, could they, if we modified it a little bit, so say it was like some kind of like kickball game, or someone mentioned tetherball earlier, something like that. Is it an activity the child's very interested in and would want to engage in? They'd be motivated to join. And then the people in the environment. So these will all have a strong influence on the interactions that occur and the quality of those interactions. And so for some students who are deafblind, you might think, okay, well, yeah, let's go to the cafeteria and we'll sit with, the fourth grade class, and this student's a fourth grader. We're going to sit with the fourth grade class. But the cafeteria might be a very kind of noisy, loud environment, and that might not be the best place to focus on having helping them use a photo conversation book to engage in a conversation, or to use a talker, or to be able to hear a peer if maybe they're hard of hearing, but they can hear some voices if in a quieter environment. So thinking about things like that. So what I think you need to pay attention to is really thinking about, when you're thinking about the spaces, the recess yard, the cafeteria, the hallways, the classrooms, is this going to be a space that we can just use as is, or are we going to have to think about ways that we might have to adapt or modify so that the student can have success here? And then when you're looking for opportunities in terms of those spaces and activities, really think about, is this a place where it's going to be easy for me to pull in a peer so that they can both pay attention to the same things? They'd have this opportunity to have this interaction back and forth. So it's just, I just want you to be mindful of that, because I don't think it's just as easy as thinking back to that chart I just showed you of, are your students in that space at the same time, in the same location, and doing the same thing? You might have to actually really think about the students' visual and auditory needs when you're planning. And I think I have an example next to show you. Okay, yeah, so I have a story here. So this is a schoolyard, an elementary schoolyard here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And I remember showing up at this school. I was doing some consulting with some students there, and the principal pulled me out in the yard because she was so proud of what the PTA had done over the weekend. And they had done all this fundraising and gotten all this paint and all these volunteers, and they decided to really, it was a more of a just plain black recess yard with basketball hoops, and there's a play structure off to the side and a grassy area too. But it was pretty much just a big blacktop area. And they use it a lot for PE and things like that. So they went out, and she was so proud of it. And I can see how there could be some order to this now. You can tell kids to go to the yellow square, and line up by the numbers. You could tell them to meet on the circle or find your number within here. But for a child with vision issues, I think this would be a very, very hard space to maneuver. And there were a lot of students at this school too who also had autism spectrum disorder. And I also think that it would just be very, very confusing to them, on top of how confusing recess already is for a lot of these kids with sensory issues and kids with sensory impairments. So that just be mindful. Like this is what a schoolyard, this is a kind of an extreme, but this is what a typical schoolyard might seem like to a kid who has significant vision loss as well as a hearing loss, or a child who has big sensory differences because of autism. So really, you've got to think about the environment and the space. I have an example now of a video I want to show you. This is a little boy. He was in second grade. He's And he's learning to play wall ball, and he's with two peers, and it's not a captioned video. He is but the only thing you'll hear is this boy in the green shirt at one point is going to say, let him get the ball. And so what was really cool is so this was an example of, there was a lot of things happening on the playground yard. But what worked for this particular boy is they turned away from all the busyness on the yard, where he was kind of just either not joining in or just kind of walking around the yard but not engaging, and found a small space against the wall. And he's just with two trusted peers from his classroom, and they are attempting to teach him to play wall ball, and with adults just kind of watching on, ready to step in if they need to. But actually the kids are doing a very nice job. So let's take a peek at this. And again, at one point in it, you will see the boy in the green shirt with the long hair say, let him get the ball. But otherwise there is nothing that you'll miss.
Let him pick it up.
So it's so sweet, isn't it? It's just, and I might refer to it again later when we talk about encouraging interactions or facilitating interactions, because even though the boy says, like, let him pick it up, then he actually went over and actually physically kind of helped him to pick it up. And if I look at it as someone trained in deafblindness, I'm like, oh, I wish they gave him a little more time to do it independently. But still, they were making a really good attempt. He was patting him on the back, giving him a lot of tactile feedback that you did the right, we're here, you got the ball, good job. So it's a nice example. So just an example of, how great peers can be and these relationships can be. And what I'll tell you is I talked to the mother of this little boy last week when I was asking if I could show this video, and she said, yeah, she goes, for sure. And she goes, but the relationships go beyond just being in person. And she told me during the pandemic lockdown, his classmates were FaceTiming with him. They were making silly, he's really very, very hard of hearing and doesn't like to wear his hearing aids. So they were making silly faces to make him laugh. They were watching stories on videos together and things like that. So they stayed connected to him even when they couldn't be together. And that's because of the types of things that the team did, prior to help build the relationship. So Kayla, I'm going to pass it, or well, maybe we should check first to see if there's any questions, and then I'll pass it on to you.
As of now, there are no questions in the chat box, but I did want to add to being aware of the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone has a question, you can type it now, because I'll just share a couple more examples of how important it is to kind of realize the environment for a student who's deafblind. So when I was a one-on-one aide for a student, it was very similar to the wall ball story of he had his friends and they would go kind of away from the play structure, because that was a very loud, noisy, kids moving area. And they would go to a nice, quieter area where they would, dance with him and play with him, learn signs and try to sign with him. And it became recess where I really just stepped back and watched and was just kind of there if they needed me. Because the relationship just grew so much. But then I've seen times in classrooms where the student who's deafblind is, placed front and center so they can get the best access to the board. And this student was then also sat next to the projector, which is also front and center. And this student had Usher syndrome and wore hearing aids or cochlear implant. I want to say hearing aids. But his hearing was still pretty low. But when the projector got too hot and the fan came on, he heard it. And then he got very distracted and he kept looking around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. And the teacher and the aide just kept telling him to pay attention to the person signing for him. But he couldn't pay attention because of this sound that was right next to him. And so even though, front and center might be best for vision, for the vision he had left, now his hearing was being affected by the projector next to him. So it's really important if a student is kind of, if their behavior is not the behavior you want, there's probably a reason. I would say that they're communicating to you that they are distracted by something that we're not catching. So it's just so important for the environment. And like assemblies is one where it's a very dark room. It could be loud because there's speakers, there could be music or lights, just something to prepare for when you're bringing a child who's deafblind in. And still no questions. So I am just going to continue on, Julie. So opportunities to connect. We are going on through. So it's important to build that connection. As you see before, these children who built a relationship at school continue to keep it during the pandemic lockdown. And I know it was very hard on everybody, but to keep inclusive practices going and peer relationships strong, it took a lot of amazing technical work on the parents and the teachers. And I've seen some students who had multiple screens so they can see all of their classmates in their classroom or hear them, like know that they're there, but still have the screen to make everything bigger, have an interpreter, had like an iPad to do the sound or for the teacher to see the student. I mean, so many different options that I saw to try to continue the inclusive practices for our students who are deafblind. And it looked different on everybody. I mean, some people who had very little vision to people who had little hearing to people who had neither. How we were trying to keep them connected to their community is so important. Students need opportunities to learn to communicate and interact as directly as possible. This is just a time where, I mean, I'll probably say this word a million times during my portion of the presentation, but it's so important for you to model and be the example. You as the adult need to just model. So kids know, how to talk to your student, how to interact with them the best way. Because, you're going to build that bridge for them and then, walk away. I always say that a lot of our job is to fade ourselves out of it. So the students can continue the relationship, without a teacher there telling them how to communicate to each other. And, great question. Do I need to do this with the student or could a peer do it instead? This is just, I mean, a great thing to think about. Just, if when I was a teacher, I used to do different groups. Like we would do small groups for like language arts. And this would be a time where we would have our students, our general education peers, a few of them would come in and do groups with us. And, this would be a time where the teacher group was usually like a reading portion. So I can get data on them all reading or pointing to words, however they read. And I would model it and then I'd kind of show the student what to do. And then there would be times where, they would be reading books outside of language arts groups because that's what they learned to do together. And so, it's definitely possible and it can take some time, but I think what we saw at our opening activity is that we all want to be included. We all want to have friends and create these relationships. And as much as I have loved all of my students, I cannot be their best friend in school. They need to make, other friends that are their age more appropriate. I just tried to switch to the next slide. Okay, so this is just one of my favorite quotes. A child with disabilities often spends hours being taught how to interact with others, but why don't we spend time teaching those without disabilities how to interact with them? And so this, I mean, I think it really speaks for itself. As a former special education teacher, it did feel like I had to keep finding ways for my class to be included in my school. But after a couple of years, everyone really started figuring out, more inclusive practices, and then it just really became more and more natural. And then, if one of my students got really loud, it wasn't like a distraction to other students. It was like, oh, that's how they communicate because they're excited to see us, or that's how they're communicating now because they got frustrated with something, like, hey, how can I help you? And students want to learn. I mean, the general ed peers that I've worked with, I've never worked with a student that, didn't want to have more friends. Um, Julie, I'm so sad you can't see the comment section because people are saying great things. Okay, and I do see some questions.
That's great. I was just going to tell you, I thought there might be some.
Yes. Okay, so maybe I'll read this question out loud so you guys don't just watch me read. At what point is a child too old to intervene for socially? My daughter is 100% mainstreamed, but will be on the outskirts until students approach her. Do I talk to teachers, leaders, so they can ask a student to do this if it is not happening naturally? Yes. I would not, there is never an age that is too old, I would say, to intervene for socially. I've worked with adults who are deafblind when I used to work for Helen Keller National Center, and they were people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s that needed help, wanting to go on dating websites, wanting to go to like signing events, just really wanting to meet people, and they needed help socially. And so I think asking a teacher or leader to help, asking hopefully the Wisconsin Project to help set that up. I say this a lot with inclusive practices and peer relationships. You can't just like throw someone in. I was kind of thinking about this with swimming. If you're going to teach someone to swim, you don't just throw them in the deep end and say, figure it out. There's a plan. You talk about how to swim, what your arms do, what your legs do, like what we do if there's an emergency. And that's kind of like with forming peer relationships for some of our students. It's really important to, and we will get into this more later, but we talk about ability awareness in classroom and like things that we can do to prep. So actually, you know what, we got a lot of slides on this. So we will talk, I'll get more info for you, Krista.
Yeah, Kayla, this is Julie.
Yeah.
If I could just add a little something. Great question and great response. Kayla, I do think that some of the things we'll talk about coming up will address some of this, but also on the resource list, there's a learning module about social skills from the National Center on Deafblindness. So if this child or youth is deafblind, might be really helpful to share that with the child's team. It has because it really shows examples from across all ages and how to connect both at school and in the community. So that'll be one resource you might want to also check out.
Yes, and then I also see a comment saying that we don't see the general ed students wanting to interact with special education students. And it's harder as they age, which we are also going to get to. So to be continued.
Yeah.
And then Marianne also said she tries to make her class very fun, so people want to join. And I totally agree with that.
And the other I will say to the comment before that, I mean, a lot of this does have a lot to do with the school climate. And what's the culture at the school? So you might have to, I mean, and we will talk about this when we talk about ability awareness. Lots of times it's the adults that need the information so that this can happen. And then we're also going to talk at the very end, and I'll say it now in case we don't get to it, but, every kid in the class doesn't have to be the child's friend. You might, let's try to start out and get like 2 or 3 or 4 important peers, that they're connected with. And then it might expand out. But we're going to think about quality over quantity.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
And Jennifer, I feel like your question goes with that. How do we inspire the teachers and staff? We have a whole slide on it. So great questions, because you guys are basically just writing our presentation for us. Okay, so preparing the environment for these peer relationships. So ability awarenesses, I'm going to give you some examples. I'm pretty sure it's on the next slide. That can be done in elementary school, middle school, and high school. But it's just so important to build awareness, understanding, and empathy for these children. And I mean, as I said before, I mean, right when you first started swimming, you weren't great at it. Like, you have to practice, and it does take practice. It takes messing up, and it takes, I always like to say, create a whole plan and then be okay if it all falls through, because that is usually what happens when, making friends. And I feel like I kind of connect this more to making friends as an adult. We're a little bit more picky, and it's like, you start liking someone and then they do something you don't like, and you're like, well, I'm going to go try to make a different friend. So I kind of feel like there's some similarities there. But finding interests and skills and learning goals together is great. I mean, if my student shows any interest in like some sort of cartoon, or gosh, there was some cartoon that all my 7th graders loved, and now I can't even remember what it was called, and they would never stop talking about it, but it was very age appropriate. Well, I mean, probably not age appropriate to them, but I mean, all of the 7th graders, 8th graders watched these shows. And it was something that I would always try to bring up. So when we had students come into our classroom, or we were out at recess, I would first bring it up and then have their conversation kind of continue without me, because I don't know the TV show. And then creating a judgment-free zone. This is, I mean, I would even say more for the adult to do. And encouraging the open communication. All questions are welcome. Check in often with students and peers. So when my first year working as a one-on-one aide for a student who is deafblind, I had a general ed peer come up to me, and this was elementary school. He must have been 1st or 2nd grade. And I had a student come up to me and just say, "Why does he look like an alien?" And I was just so appalled by the question. My response was like, "We don't say that. Would you want someone to say that about you?" And I basically got mad at the student for asking a question. And I kick myself to this day that I never went back to this poor student and talked to him about, "Oh, are you asking me why this student looks different? Are you asking me why he uses a walker? Why he, looks different than you?" Like, and give him the words to explain it better, to ask a question that is more polite. But it's just so important to never, like, give them a place to ask questions, because we are the people who should be able to answer them as best as we can. And that is just, so after that student, and I probably didn't even think about it till like a year later, where I was like, that poor 1st or 2nd grader who is now going to go through their entire life never asking questions because I got mad at them, when it could have been a great learning opportunity, because the child I worked with is awesome and they could have been best friends. So it's just important. So then after that, I prepared an answer. So when children came up to me and asked questions, I didn't care how they asked it. I helped them develop a better language, to ask a question, and then to bond with their peers, because it's just so important to give them that learning opportunity that, as a teacher now of like almost 10 years, I'll just always regret that day. But let my regret teach you something. Okay, I'm pretty sure I totally went away from my talking points, but that's okay. This is usually what happens when I present. Okay, provide information. This one, I do have really important things to talk about. Good. Now I'm not even sure what slide this is. 18. Okay. So reciprocal interactions. This means when two people can communicate to each other back and forth. It's a balanced relationship. And even just even just saying that sentence. I know I've had it go both ways, where maybe the general ed peer just kind of runs the whole show. I've also had the student from my classroom, start talking about like dinosaurs, prehistoric animals. That was his favorite topic. So if you ever got him on that topic, you did not get to talk for the rest of the conversation because he had so much information to tell you. So, at first it would be a lot of modeling or me reminding the student, like, okay, you just talked for like a couple of minutes. Let's, do you have a question to ask about prehistoric animals to your friends? And, vice versa. If the general ed peer just kept talking or, kept trying to overcompensate for helping, I would try to remind them like, hey, step back. Let's see what they're going to do. Like, let's, count to 10 and let them respond to you so we can see, what they want. Let's see what they're going to communicate. So, it kind of does, you do like a direct prompting, but then you want to do indirect and just like kind of fade yourself out again. And so, how are you going to bridge that barrier? Because you want to find a connection to get a really solid relationship formed. But you also don't want to be a part of it forever. You got to back up. Interest and questioned by peers is a great thing, said by my story. And then offer information. So this is especially focusing on high school students. It's a little bit harder sometimes to get them involved, get them talking, trying to get them to ask you a question. So offering information, like if you're seeing, when I was working at a middle school, one of my students just kept sitting with a group of cheerleaders. And we're not sure why, because we didn't know them, but he just would sit in the middle of them eating their snacks or lunch. And they were very accepting, just, let him in there. They would talk to him sometimes if he wanted to talk. And then that was a time where, I would just offer information. Like if my student had a hard day, he would still sit with them, but he would wrap himself in his jacket and just, avoid everybody. And so that was a time I'd come over and say like, hey, thank you guys so much for like still having my student sit with you. He had a pretty rough day today. If you can try to talk to him, but if he doesn't talk, maybe give him some space and then come back, or, and then always give them the opportunity to ask questions. So I'd always say, if you have any questions, like you can ask me, ask them, try. It's kind of like we are also building that relationship with the peers so they feel comfortable to talk to us too. So don't be that mean teacher and tell them not to ask a question. And then building confidence. When I had a student like who would go out of their way to, be that good peer relationship student, to form that good peer relationship, I would give them compliments. I mean, I would say, how kind it is that they decided to wait back for my student who might take longer to get somewhere, or how nice it was that they chose to help guide my student. Because, we all, and I would say to my students too, of like, hey, good job on like holding their hand the whole time, or good job on like showing like that you need a break right now. Everyone loves positive reinforcement. I know I love it and thrive on it. So I know our kids do too. I also have, I think, a story for this. Oh, yes. So I just wanted to really point out, make sure you teach them to be a friend and not a teacher. Sometimes during ability awareness activities, when I'm with a general ed classroom, I will tell them, I can't remember how I would say it. I would say like, can you be my helper and like be a kind person to make friends or something? But I would never say like, you're going to be like a mini teacher to go teach my student how to do something. Like, no, they're all still the same age range. I want them to be equal people. So, build that relationship. And then if I ever felt like a student was starting to become too much of a teacher, like kind of how we saw in the handball video, I would step in. if needed. Oh my gosh, this is still me. Okay, I'm going over on time. I'll go quickly. So here are some ability awareness
Don't worry,
activities
this stuff's good.
that I love. And it's important to, be aware of the students you're talking about, talk about the specific disabilities that are in your classroom. A lot of mine were autism, so I would talk about communication and maybe if they're nonverbal. We have the resources for all of these in our handout. So I guess I'm just going to go really quickly. The Band-Aid one. This is one my friend would do for her high school students, where she would give 5 of them different injuries, and it would be like a scab. They fell in, oh my gosh, I got a scab on their elbow.
They scraped their elbow.
Thank you, scrape. They would scrape their elbow. Someone had a head injury. Someone has a stomach ache. Someone scrapes their knee. And so then she gives them a Band-Aid to all of them. And, says like, okay, is that fair? And usually students will be like, well, this isn't fair because I have a headache or a head injury and you gave me a Band-Aid that's not going to help. And so this is just a good way to communicate fairness, and that fairness doesn't mean, we all get the same thing. We all get what we need to be successful, just like in education. And so this is a great way to say, this student, has ADHD, so they might need a fidget spinner during a lesson, or this child has autism and need headphones during a lesson. And it just makes it more, everyone understands that we all have our own needs, and that's fine. The no voice activity. This was really fun in elementary school, where I would tell everyone to turn off their voice and they had to tell me that they were hungry. And so they'd usually sign food or hold their stomachs, tell me that they're cold and they want their jacket. They would shiver or, try to mime a jacket. And then I'd say, your friend took your ball and you really want it back and they're not giving it back to you. And usually someone in the classroom would pretend to hit, or they'd look really angry, like try to yell. And this is when I'd say, okay, so this is important to know that for my students who are nonverbal, they might hit you, but it's because they're trying to communicate something to you. So it's important, that you tell a teacher or the adult that's up there, but find a way to communicate with the student so it doesn't happen again, and go through that. Last activity is the puzzle activity, which I would get a blank puzzle sheet, and then give everyone a puzzle piece. And everyone had to write down something that made them different. And it could be what their favorite show is, that they're tall, they have freckles, brown eyes, whatever it is. And then they get to color in their puzzle piece. We'd put it all together and it'd be this colorful puzzle. And I would just explain how we all have differences, and it's important to be proud of our differences and accept who we all are, because together we're a big, colorful puzzle piece community. Woo. Okay.
Okay, take
So
a deep
there
breath,
will-
'cause you've got more.
No, are you serious? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. So, information to share. It's important to talk about their interests and strengths and talents. It's I really try to avoid the word disability a lot, because I like to focus on what the students are able to do, their ability. And, it kind of gets forgotten sometimes. So, find what makes this student awesome and share that with their peers so they also know. Emphasizing similarities to peers, connect them if they like the same, what was the Wisconsin team? Packers?
Green Bay Packers.
Green Bay Packers, totally into sports.
Milwaukee Bucks. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I know that word. But any sort of similarities that they have is a great place to start. But it is also important to say what the impact of their sensory loss can do. So, if they have tunnel vision, it's important to let students know so they don't start, trying to explain something when they're not even in their visual field. And then, explain the differences in communication if they use an AAC device or sign language. I know all my students loved learning sign language, or all the general education peers loved learning it. We ended up doing a reverse mainstreaming sign language class because they just wanted to learn it so badly. So that's always fun too. Accommodations, equipment, other supports, teach them about that. If a student uses a white cane or assistive technology, educate the other students about what it is. Braille, all that fun stuff. Kids love learning about it, and it makes you super cool. Ways to interact and engage in activities with peers. Again, this is you modeling, showing how to engage with the peer, how to form that relationship, and then fading yourself out. Bam.
Excellent. And all of these are discussed in the article as well. And so is this slide. So
yes. And this is just saying like how to provide this information. So this can be whole class or small group presentations, ability awareness fair. Some people do it as a whole school-wide event. I personally would just go into a classroom and do it because I felt like you would get more personal questions asked. Starting some sort of club or after social group meetings. I loved doing lunch club with high schoolers because that's such an easy time for everyone just to hang out in a room or outside and communicate to each other. I also did an after school dance program and made sure some of my students came too as I was there. So I kind of like also was the aide, I guess. Sharing an All About Me book, which we have an example of a brochure, I'm pretty sure on the next slide. Reading children's literature to class, followed by discussion. Every day there are more books coming out of different people's abilities being the main character of the book. And I'm not sure if we added that in our resource list, but I even think a little Google search would be able to get you some. I know I post about this all the time. I guess I'll just name drop me. I have an Instagram called Inclusion Starts Now, and I have a whole section about books that I talk about, children books that have different people with different abilities as the main characters, and books for adults to read about people with disabilities. In high school, develop an elective class or diversity that includes disability. Through carefully planned simulation activities. Julie has a whole article about it. This is something that is a debated topic because doing a simulation activity maybe can give you some perspective, but it does not mean that you know what it's like for a person with that disability forever. You had, a 5-minute activity wearing a blindfold and earplugs, which can teach you something, but it's not, you do not know what it's like to be deafblind still. But whole article about it, great tips and stuff. Julie's amazing. Informally, as peers engage with each other in class and other school activities, again, it's just modeling, giving the information, etc.
great, Kayla.
I only went 10 minutes over, and
Here's
here's
the example. Yeah, and this was a brochure. There is a backside to it, and I didn't post that. It has a lot of his medical information, but this was developed by a team, and the parent of this young man said that I could share it. But what's just great about it is just a way to just show, like, again, it starts out with talking about what are the most important things to know about him. And it starts out with, I'm a quick learner and I have a great sense of humor, right? So, but then it also talks about the fact that he has vision impairment, he wears hearing aids, things like that, and how he communicates. But talks about what works for me, how cool to like give it. So this would be helpful for adults or, for children. And then talk about ways to show similarities. I'm sure there's other kids that play Minecraft and love baseball and like to cook with their siblings. So, and then how nice for the family to include their vision for their child. So that's important stuff for people to know. So there's that example. And if you want to see more examples of All About Me materials, just contact me. My contact information is at the end, but I have a whole resource list that I'd be happy to send to you. All right, Kayla, you have a couple more, but we do have to keep moving. Kayla?
So embarrassing. I can't believe I did that.
Okay.
Muted myself. Okay. I started talking and I was muted. So who provides the information? It should be a person with knowledge and experience about the information. So it could be the student who wants to introduce themselves. It could be another person who is deafblind or has a disability, teacher, intervener, a service provider, parent, sibling, an informed peer. It could really be whoever you think is going to provide the information best.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, so connecting with the teachers too. So as the special ed teacher at this school, this was my former school, I really wanted inclusion. That was a huge thing for me. And when I first got there, I was with a bunch of third graders, and all the general ed third grade teachers were like, yeah, I don't think inclusion works. Like I was the youngest by like 20, 30 years. I was a lot of teachers about to retire, and I just kept trying to, be like, well, hey, just let us come in for like 20 minutes. We'll sit in the back. Like, it wasn't what I really felt like was inclusion, but I felt like the teachers needed to get on board too, that they can trust me. And it did take, I was always there for lunch when teachers have their 30-minute lunch, I always went to the staff room and ate lunch with everybody. If they ever hung out outside of school, I tried to hang out with them. If they needed teachers to volunteer for something, I'd volunteer. I made a very active I just tried to be a very active teacher because I didn't want to be the special ed teacher that was just, doing my own thing. I wanted to be a part of school. Anything that all the students were doing, my classroom was doing too. And I modeled for everyone. Positive talk always. I did have a lot of teachers be excited that the student that was mainstreaming in their class said hi to them. And to me, I was like, well, yeah, they can do so much more than just say hi to you. Like they know your name, they know what they're learning. Like it would frustrate me, but instead of me, again, getting mad at them for being excited of my student recognizing them, I would say like, oh, that's great. Like, if you want to ask him about prehistoric animals, he'll tell you everything. Like, I would try to, think of something new that they can do with my students. So they knew that there was more to them than just saying hi after being in their class for so long. And then making corrections lightly. I know there's a lot of, person first language challenges that happen. Or, the language that they would use sometimes wasn't always the most appropriate. And I would kind of make corrections by me rephrasing what they said to them, just to make it, it's just so they could hear it. And it's just kind of how I keep saying people with different abilities instead of disabilities, just to, put that positive spin on it. But anyways, this picture, every April, my former school, which still does this, even though I haven't been there for 3 or 4 years, buy the autism awareness shirt for April off this website. And they all buy it with their own money. The school doesn't buy it. They all purchase it themselves. And then they get their school name embroidered on the sleeve. And one of the teachers still sends me the shirt every year. And it's just something that's so great that really brought the school together, to a school that I came into that barely did mainstreaming or inclusion. Years later, they're still doing all the practices, even though I'm not there, which is great.
And that's a great example, Kayla, of the importance of the climate of the school. Yes. And the fact that it just keeps, you start with small steps, and you make those connections with 1 or 2 people, and you try to expand it. You try to get the administrator on board. So I appreciate that you shared that and that it's been lasting at that school. That's wonderful.
Yeah. But definitely don't go into a school thinking you know everything, because then they probably won't accept it as much. You definitely
and I can appreciate that it's hard to wait. Like if you're a parent out there, it's hard for you to wait. And but that's why maybe really kind of focusing on like, let's get connected with one teacher or one class or a few kids, and like really focus on that at first, and then it will expand. So I want to give some thought now to what we're going to do with the rest of the time, because we're getting down to the wire, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So let me tell you what was planned for the last bit was we were going to talk about the third piece, which was facilitating interactions. You definitely have the slides, so you can read them. And I also wrote about it a lot in the first article that's listed on the resource list. The things that Kayla just spoke about are in the second article about how to provide information to peers. But one thing I do want to remind you is, and Kayla has said it because she said she was going to say modeling a million times, but it really is true. Your actions are going to speak much louder than your words, and you just have to be mindful that other adults and the kids at school are going to be always constantly watching and listening how adults are treating, interacting, and speaking to students with disabilities or the child who's deafblind. So you really have to be aware of that and really mindful about what your interactions look like, making sure that you're demonstrating a high level of respect for the student and their efforts and their skill development, no matter where they are, the fact that everyone's making steps forward, progressing, and holding high expectations, the expectation that the child can learn, that the child will learn, that the child can make friends and can connect with their peers. And it may be, if you feel like you have staff or you're working with staff that don't have those same high expectations or don't understand how integration or inclusion would be beneficial to the student, or why the student would want to have friends with a wide variety of peers with and without disabilities, then you really do have to know that your staff also needs ability awareness training or diversity training, because you want them to be that model as well.
Yeah, and doing the ability awareness activities in the classroom. I mean, the general ed teacher was there and listening. So it's kind of like they also got to enjoy the activity.
Yeah. So the next few slides, we're going to just really talk about this. And I'm not going to read through them all. You have them. But the importance of adults recognizing that and there's actually a lot of research around it, that adults can oftentimes get in the way. They can be a barrier to peer interaction. So we don't want to be a barrier. We want to be the bridge. So thinking about how your role can switch to where you're providing support and information to both students. So the student who's deafblind or the child with disabilities, as well as the peer. And you're thinking about the ways that you can give that information most effectively. You're going to recognize that the peers can be a better role model, a social role model for most routines than you can be. So that's just, and we talked earlier about things to consider in terms of the spaces and the activities and things like that. So, and I have a couple of videos coming up. I think that might be the most helpful thing to do in the short amount of time, and then we'll take questions. So there's two videos I want to show you. They're both taken from the Social Skills Open Hands, Open Access module. And that's listed on your resource list. And one is from an older student at a secondary school, and then one's a younger kid. And I just want they're short videos, but just pay attention to how the intervener in each case is, in the first case, she's just there, honestly, physically supporting the student who's drumming with another student. And she's not interfering at all in their interaction, which is all happening without any language. It's just them enjoying the activity together. And so let's watch Preston here in his music class. And so this is a great example of just letting kids be together and connect. Okay, so I did not take that video. It's from that module, but what I can tell you is what's clear is that both boys are really enjoying themselves. You can tell from their facial expressions and that they're remaining engaged. And probably I would assume that peer was provided with information about how to engage in this activity with him. How will you know what pace to follow? So that he'll model and follow you. How will you know if he's enjoying it? And clearly the intervener was given information about how to be there as a support, but not get too involved, to let the peers just go with it. So that's great to see. And this next one, you'll see a young girl, and she's out at recess, and she uses a wheelchair. and there's an intervener there or an aide there, and they're blowing bubbles, and a peer is going to ask a question, and it's a very short clip, but he's going to ask a question to the intervener. So this is going to show you a good example of how to answer those kinds of questions.
For now, we don't touch. You can touch teacher, but you can't touch kids. You can touch.
Lisa's laughing. She is laughing. At the bubbles. I laugh.
So how great is that? So there's a lot of things that are happening right here. The bubbles, instead of like blowing the bubbles away from the girl and having her just sitting there, the bubbles are right there, practically in her lap, and they're blowing the bubbles on her. She's clearly having a good time. And then the boy has a question. Is the way she's, the noises she's making, the way she's moving her head, is that her laughing? Like, it looks different, right, than maybe what he'd expect. So she's like, yeah, she's laughing. Do you think she's laughing because of the bubbles? I mean, this is just terrific. So this is a intervener or an adult providing information that can be helpful to the child. And then the next few, the next few slides are, again, just going to list almost verbatim what came from the article. So I would just encourage you to go ahead and read that, because we need to we need to end. But the last thing I'll say is just this quality over quantity. And this is always what I've done when I've been in a position to support these relationships to develop, whether when I was a para or a teacher or a technical assistance provider, is focus on developing a few strong, sustainable relationships first, because that will expand. And really look for kids that share interests and similar interaction styles, because typically that's what brings kids together. And we had a final quote. Walking with a friend in the dark is better than walking alone in the light. And that was Helen Keller that said that. So just, again, focusing on how important it is to have relationships. And I'm really happy that you came to this presentation and that this is something that you think is important for children that you know or are teaching. And there's some of the resources we talked about, and there's a longer list that you were provided. So I'm going to stop the share so we can quickly see if we've got questions.
We don't have any new questions. I'm pretty sure we've gotten everybody's question-ish. Yeah, but I do feel like that I think inspiring teachers and staff to really step it up, that can be really hard, because if you don't have someone on campus pushing for it, I do think that makes it really challenging, like as the parent, to do it, which people can. I mean, that's one of the adult books that I like to recommend. This woman who has, her book is called The Lucky Few. And she has 2 children with Down syndrome, and she just advocates so much for them, wants them fully included. And I'm not really even quite sure if the schools are always on board for it, but I know it's an ongoing, I don't want to say battle, but it's the ongoing push that she does. So her books are really good. She now has 2 of them.
All right. Well, thank you, Kayla, and thank you, Julie, for sharing all of this great information and all of the ideas of how to strengthen our own practices to support students in building the peer relationships that we all find value in, along with some activities to try within the classroom. So thank you for all of that. We did have one request in the question and answer just for samples of those books, those All About Me books. So maybe, Julie, if you could share some samples and I can stick it in the folder so everyone has access to that.
Yes, I will. I have a whole PDF I'll send to you. I did a poster presentation at the Charge conference a couple years ago. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And then I just want to say thank you, Maria and Mary, for providing ASL interpreting for this presentation. We really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you for logging in and taking time out of your day to learn with us. Before we close for the afternoon, I would like to ask each of you, and I'm going to put it in the chat right now, just to take a quick survey. The survey should also pop up when you close out Zoom today. But because WDB TAP is grant funded, we rely on this information gathered to help us make our programs and services stronger for children who are deafblind, for their families and their service providers. So we really would appreciate you taking a couple minutes just to fill that out. For those of you who are wanting CEUs, please fill out that survey, add your email address, and then I will contact you with an additional email to have some more information about how to apply for those CEUs. And if you have questions about this presentation or anything related to deafblindness, please feel free to contact me at any point. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope that you have learned something that you can take back to use with your own child or a child that you work with. Have a great night. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The logo is displayed for the WESP-DHH Wisconsin Deaf-Blind Technical Assistance Project, WDB TAP. The logo for the Ideas That Work is displayed and reads, "The contents of this presentation were developed under a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, H326T180044. However, those contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government."